Chapter 1. The Baker. The bread was proving, and the coffee machine was doing something vindictive when the door opened. Hattie Pemberton did not look up. She was 40 minutes into a dispute with a sourdough starter that had opinions about ambient humidity, and the espresso machine had developed what she could only describe as a personal grudge. It pulled shots with the enthusiasm of a teenager doing chores. 6 months in this town, and the machine still hadn't forgiven her for the move from Portland. "Be right with you," she said, punching the steam wand into compliance. "Take your time." It was a low voice, the kind that didn't raise itself because it had never needed to. Hattie registered it the way she registered the weather, as a fact about the room, and continued fighting the espresso machine. When she finally turned around, the man at the counter was tall enough that she had to adjust her gaze upward, which she resented on principle. He had dark hair cut close, a jaw that looked like it had been engineered for disagreement, and eyes that were... She paused. Amber. Not brown, not hazel. Amber, like whiskey held up to a window. He was looking at her, not at the menu board behind her, not at the pastry case, at her, with an expression she couldn't read because it contained too many things at once. Surprise and recognition, and something that looked, from certain angles, like a man who'd been walking for a very long time and had just been told he could stop. "What can I get you?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. Something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker, gold, bleeding into the amber like a match struck behind glass, there and then gone so quickly she decided she'd imagined it. "Coffee," he said, black. "Anything to eat?" He looked at the pastry case the way a person looks at something they've forgotten the word for. "Whatever you'd recommend." She poured his coffee. She pulled a Pau Chocolat from the case, her best seller, the one she'd spent 3 weeks perfecting after the move. She plated it. She set both in front of him. Their fingers didn't touch. She was practiced at the handoff, efficient, the kind of muscle memory that comes from serving 200 drinks a day. But the air between his hand and hers carried something, not heat, not static, something warm and directional, like standing near a window where the sun was coming through. She stepped back. He sat at the corner table, the one by the window, the one nobody ever chose because it had a draft. He stayed for an hour and a half. He drank 3 coffees. He didn't touch his phone. She caught herself looking at him 4 times. Each time she had a reason. Checking if he needed a refill, wiping down the counter, adjusting the menu board, assessing whether the chair wobble at table 6 was getting worse. 4 reasons, all legitimate, none of them the actual reason. When he left, he said, "The bread, the sourdough in the case. Is that available tomorrow?" "I bake it every morning." "Then I'll be back tomorrow." He was. Gideon Greaves sat in his truck in the parking lot of a small-town bakery cafe and did not start the engine. "Hours," Tarn said. The word arrived the way Tarn's words always arrived, not as speech, not as thought, but as a fact of the body. A compass settling, a bone finding its socket. "Hours," Tarn said again, with the patient certainty of a creature who had never in its existence been wrong about something that mattered. The one with the flower on her face. That one. Hours. Gideon gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. His breathing was a thing he was choosing to do, one inhale at a time, because the alternative was to go back inside the cafe and stand too close to a woman he'd met 11 minutes ago and breathe in the scent of warm bread and butter and vanilla, and something underneath all 3 that wasn't the bakery, wasn't the flour, was her, was the specific, precise, irreplaceable scent of his mate, carried in the skin of a woman who didn't know wolves existed. "She's human," he said, out loud, to no one, and to Tarn, and to the steering wheel. "Yes," Tarn agreed. "Hours, though." He called Boyd. "Problem," Gideon said. "What kind?" "The goddess kind." Silence on the line. Then, "Please tell me it's a wolf." "She's a baker." "A baker." She has flour on her face, and she fights with her espresso machine, and my wolf is telling me she's ours, and she is completely, entirely, catastrophically human. Boyd exhaled in a way that contained an entire career of damage control. Gideon, you're the Alpha King. You govern every pack between the Cascades and the coast. The goddess has never, in 600 years of recorded bonds, chosen a human for an Alpha King. Never. This isn't a complication. This is a theological event. I'm aware of what it is. Do the elders know? No, and they won't. Not until I figured out how to tell a woman who doesn't know wolves exist that she's bonded to one. I'll start working on cover stories, Boyd said. Chapter 2. The Regular. He came back every day. Hattie noticed because it was her job to notice regulars. Who came when, what they ordered, whether they wanted conversation or silence. Gideon Greaves wanted silence, black coffee, and whatever she put in front of him, which she found either flattering or suspicious, and hadn't decided which. What she couldn't explain was what she was doing about it. On his third visit, she made a rosemary olive oil cake that wasn't on the menu. She'd never made it before. She woke up at 4 a.m. with the recipe in her head like a song she'd heard in a dream, and by 6 it was in the oven, and she couldn't have told you why. She put a slice on his plate next to his coffee. No charge. I'm testing a new recipe, she said. You're the trial audience. I'm honored. Don't be. If it's bad, I need someone to tell me. He ate it in 3 bites, his eyes closed on the second bite. A sound came out of him, low, involuntary, the kind of sound a person makes when they are experiencing something so fundamentally correct that their body responds before their brain can stop it. It was not, strictly speaking, an appropriate sound to make in a bakery at 7:15 in the morning. Hattie's face went warm. She turned back to the espresso machine and cleaned a portafilter that was already clean. She made us food, Tarn said, from the pleased, smug center of Gideon's awareness. She made us food that isn't on her menu. She made us special food. She's testing a recipe. She is feeding us. She is providing. This is courtship. It's customer service. She charged the man behind us $4 for a croissant. She gave us free cake. Explain. Gideon couldn't explain. He left a $10 tip, and the interaction sat in his chest for the rest of the day like a coal he couldn't put down. By week 2, she'd rearranged her schedule. She couldn't explain that either. She used to take Wednesday mornings off. Now she worked them because he came in on Wednesdays. She told herself it was good business practice. She told herself she was building a loyal customer base. She told herself that the fact that she put on a clean apron before he arrived, instead of the flour-dusted one she wore for everyone else, was about professionalism, not about wanting a man with amber eyes to see her looking like a person who had her life together. She caught herself staring at his hands. He had good hands, large, capable, with a stillness to them that suggested they could do precise things without rushing. She stared at them while he wrapped them around a coffee mug, and then she stared at his forearms, and then she stared at the place where his collar met his neck, and then she dropped a tray of muffins. "Everything okay?" he asked from his corner table, without looking up from the newspaper he was reading with the concentration of a man who was definitely not also looking at her. "Fine. Slippery tray. The trays they're new." The trays were not new. The trays were older than her lease. She dropped things because she was looking at us, Tarn observed. This is excellent. We are causing her to malfunction. This is a very positive sign. The worst part was the other woman. On a Thursday, a dark-haired woman came in and sat across from Gideon. Hattie didn't know her, a pack member, though she didn't know that either. The woman touched Gideon's arm while she talked. A casual touch. Meaningless. The kind of touch people make when they're comfortable with each other. Something in Hattie's chest clenched like a fist. She burned the milk. She never burned the milk. She burned the milk so badly the steam wand shrieked and 2 customers looked up. She wiped the wand with more force than the situation required and told herself she was not, absolutely not, feeling territorial about a regular customer whose name she'd learned from his credit card. Protective instinct, she muttered, scrubbing the counter. I'm protecting my revenue stream. He tips well. I have a financial interest in his continued patronage. That's all this is. She made his afternoon coffee with an extra shot. She wrote, "Have a good day," on his cup. She had never written on anyone's cup. She didn't realize she'd done it until he was gone, and she found herself checking whether he'd taken the cup with him. He had. She wrote on our cup, Tarn said, in a tone that suggested the wolf was composing a wedding registry. She wrote on our cup. She is marking us. She is using the written word to claim our drinking vessel. It's customer service, Tarn. It is mating behavior and you know it. Gideon did know it. The bond was pulling her, not the way it pulled him, not with words and recognition and the full weight of centuries of wolf instinct. It pulled her in human ways, in baking and schedule rearranging and territorial coffee milk and notes on paper cups. She was falling toward him the way a human falls, confused, resentful, full of bad explanations. He found it devastating. He found it the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He did not tell her any of this. He sat in his corner table and drank his coffee and read the newspaper he'd already read and tried to be a man who deserved extra cake. Chapter 3. The Gathering. He invited her to a dinner at the property. Family thing, he said, and her stomach did something acrobatic that she attributed to the breakfast burrito she'd had. I don't usually socialize with customers. You gave me free cake for 2 weeks. That was recipe development. You wrote on my cup. I write on lots of cups. You don't. I asked your other regulars. She looked at him. He looked at her. The air between them did the thing it always did. Tightened, warmed, became something she could almost lean against. Saturday, she said. I'll bring bread. She brought bread. She brought 3 loaves of sourdough and a fig and walnut boule and a container of whipped honey butter that she'd made at midnight for no reason that would survive cross-examination. The Greaves property was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling farmhouse on forested acreage, the kind of place that felt older than its materials. There were people everywhere. 30, maybe more, moving through the house and the yard with the easy looseness of people who lived in each other's space. They all moved the same way. She noticed it immediately. The same economy of motion she'd seen in Gideon, the same awareness of exits and sightlines, the same physical confidence that read as athletic, except it was too consistent and too uniform to be trained. These people didn't move like they'd learned to be graceful. They moved like they'd been built for something, and were trying to do it less. Your family is very fit, she told Gideon. Fresh air. All of you? It's good air. At dinner, she sat beside him. The food was, she counted, 80% protein. Burgers, steaks, a roast that could have fed a normal family for a week, but was disappearing at a rate that suggested these people had metabolisms operating on a different fuel standard. Everyone ate their meat almost raw. Are you all on the same diet? She asked Boyd, who was seated across from her and managing his face with the effort of a man defusing a bomb. Paleo, Boyd said. This isn't paleo. This is pre-paleo. This is before fire. Tilda, Gideon's younger sister, dark-haired, early 20s, possessed of a smile that was 10% too wide and a handshake that had nearly broken Hattie's fingers, laughed too loudly, then caught herself. We just like protein, Tilda said. You like protein the way marathoners like carbs. This is a clinical amount of protein. A moment later, without thinking about it, without deciding to do it, Hattie reached across the table for the bread basket and put a roll on Gideon's plate. She'd already buttered it. She didn't realize she'd done this until she caught Tilda watching her, with an expression that could only be described as delighted. What? Hattie said. Nothing. Tilda's grin was enormous. That was just nothing. Hattie looked at the buttered roll on Gideon's plate. She looked at her own empty plate. She had served a man she'd known for 3 weeks before serving herself, and she had buttered his bread with the automatic intimacy of a woman who had been doing this for years. "I was being polite," she said. "Of course," Tilda said. "I'm a host. I run a cafe. Serving people is my job." "Absolutely. I butter everyone's bread." "I'm sure you do." Under the table, Gideon's knee was 3 inches from hers. She was aware of those 3 inches the way she was aware of the edge of a cliff. Precisely, constantly, with a low hum of something that was either anxiety or anticipation, and was, in either case, disproportionate to a knee. She shifted her weight. Her knee touched his. He went still. Not normal still, something else. Something that reminded her of a nature documentary she'd seen once. A wolf in a forest, frozen mid-step, every molecule of its attention directed at a single point. Gideon was doing that, at a dinner table, because her knee had touched his. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Fine." His voice had dropped. Not dramatically, half a tone, maybe less. Enough that she felt it in her sternum rather than heard it in her ears. "You don't look fine. You look like you're trying not to move." "I'm digesting." "You are wasting this," Tarn said. "Her leg is touching ours. This is physical contact. Reciprocate. Put your hand on her knee. She will not object. She gave us free cake." Gideon did not put his hand on her knee. He ate a piece of bread and thought about county water management and tried to remember what it was like to be a person whose wolf wasn't providing a running commentary on his love life. The evening accumulated evidence. Tilda couldn't open the salsa jar. Or rather, she picked it up, twisted the lid off one-handed with a single smooth rotation, poured salsa on her burger, and put it back. The entire operation took 2 seconds. Hattie stared. "Tilda, you just opened that jar with one hand. I loosened it earlier. You twisted it off like a bottle cap. I watched you." CrossFit. CrossFit doesn't give you the grip strength of industrial equipment. It's very intensive CrossFit. Then there was the dog. One of the Greaves property's many large, extremely intelligent dogs was lying under the table. During a lull in conversation, the dog stood up, walked to the back door, rose on its hind legs, and opened the door handle. Not pawed at it, gripped it, turned it, pushed the door open with the casual competence of a creature that had done this every day of its life. Hattie watched the dog walk outside with the dignified gait of someone excusing themselves from a party. "That dog just opened a door handle." "He's well trained," Boyd said without looking up. "He opened it with his paw, like a hand. He used an opposable grip on a lever mechanism." "Rescue dog, very intelligent breed." "What breed?" "Mixed." One of the children fell off the porch railing, a 4-foot drop that should have ended in scraped knees and crying. A man sitting 15 feet away was on his feet and across the yard and catching the child before she'd fallen 2 feet. He moved so fast, his chair was still rocking when he got back. "Did you see?" Hattie started. "Great reflexes," Boyd said, who had the sentence preloaded like a round in a chamber. "He covered 15 feet in under a second. He used to play college ball." "Boyd, that was not a college ball reflex. That was a physics violation." Boyd looked at Gideon. Gideon looked at the table. Somewhere under the table, a dog that had just opened a door handle was not offering an alibi. After dinner, things went wrong. They were in the yard. She was talking to a woman named Jess about sourdough starters, which Jess was asking about with the kind of attention that suggested she'd been assigned a topic, when a crash came from the tree line. A branch breaking. Something large moving fast. Every head in the yard turned. In unison. 30 people rotating toward the sound like a school of fish changing direction. with a speed and synchronization that was not human. Hattie watched this happen. "That was very coordinated," she said. "We're an alert family," Boyd said, already there, already managing. "That wasn't alert. That was choreographed. You all turned at the same time at the same speed in the same direction. That's not a family trait. That's a hive mind." Boyd opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Good hearing," he said. "Runs in the family." "Hearing doesn't make you turn in unison. That's a vestibular response. That's—" She stopped herself. She was doing the thing her ex had hated, taking apart the beautiful, the mysterious, the unexplained, and reducing it to mechanisms. "Never mind. Good hearing. Sure." Later, she went inside to wash her hands. She took a wrong turn. The house was a labyrinth, and found herself at the back door. Through the glass, in the dusk light of the far yard, she saw something. A man, one of the dinner guests, she was almost sure, crouching. And then not crouching. And then not a man. She watched a human body compress and rearrange and become a wolf. A wolf that shook itself, trotted 3 steps, and turned to look at the house with eyes that reflected the porch light like headlamps. Hattie stood at the door. Her hands were still wet. She said, very quietly, to no one, "I'm having a stress response. This is a visual disturbance caused by low blood sugar. I had too much rare meat and not enough carbohydrates, and I am experiencing a protein-induced hallucination. This is fine. I will eat some bread, and this will resolve." She went back to the dinner table. She ate 2 rolls. The visual disturbance did not resolve. When Gideon found her, she was sitting on the porch steps staring at the yard, with the expression of a woman whose filing system had just encountered an error it couldn't process. "You look like you saw something," he said. "I saw a man turn into a dog." Gideon sat beside her, close, their shoulders almost touching. She could feel the warmth coming off him, always too warm. Always that half degree above what a body should be, which she'd been attributing to a fast metabolism and was running out of confidence about. His scent was stronger out here, away from the food and the crowd. Pine and wood smoke and something underneath, something animal, something warm-blooded and alive, something that made her want to lean sideways until her shoulder touched his and stay there. She didn't lean, but she didn't move away either, and the not moving away felt like a decision she was making with a part of her brain she didn't have clearance to access. "Hattie, I didn't see a man turn into a dog. I experienced a visual anomaly brought on by social exhaustion and dietary disruption. I should go home." "What if it wasn't a visual anomaly?" "Then I should go home faster." He looked at her. She could feel his gaze on the side of her face like a warm hand. She didn't turn. "What if everything you've noticed, the hearing, the reflexes, the way we move, the amount we eat, what if there was an explanation for all of it?" "There is. Genetics, diet, exercise, group behavioral conditioning." "What if the explanation was simpler than that?" "Simpler than genetics?" "Simpler than everything you've been building to avoid the obvious." She turned. His eyes were amber, deep, warm amber, and underneath it, she could see it now, couldn't pretend she couldn't. A ring of gold that wasn't a trick of the light and wasn't low blood sugar and wasn't anything she could file under normal. "Don't," she said. "Hattie, don't tell me something I can't unhear." The air between them was so thick she could feel it against her skin. His scent, pine and wood smoke and something deeper, something animal, something that made her want to lean into him and stay, was everywhere. She leaned forward. He leaned forward. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel his breath. She could feel the impossible warmth of him, and her hand was on his arm. She didn't remember putting it there, didn't remember deciding to touch him, and the contact was a revelation, a jolt of rightness that ran from her palm, through her wrist, and into her chest, and settled there like it belonged. The back door opened. Tilda stuck her head out. "Gideon, Boyd says there's a—" Oh. She saw them. I'll come back. The moment broke. Hattie pulled her hand off his arm. The place where she'd touched him felt cold. I should go, she said. Let me drive you. I can drive myself. Hattie. I can drive myself, Gideon. She drove home. She sat in her apartment. She opened her laptop and typed, "Group hallucination causes rural communities." Then she deleted it and typed, "Eyes that change color, gold amber." Then she deleted that and closed the laptop and sat in the dark and thought about the warmth of his arm under her hand and the ring of gold in his eyes, and the way, when he'd said her name, it had sounded like something he was afraid to put down. She was not going to search for what she'd seen in the yard. She was a practical woman. She'd moved to this town for a fresh start. She ran a bakery. She made sourdough. She did not believe in things she couldn't explain, and she was not going to start now because a man with amber eyes made her feel like her edges fit against something. At 4 a.m, she got up and baked. She made a cardamom pear tart she'd never made before. She didn't have a recipe. Her hands seemed to know what to do. When it came out of the oven at 5:30, it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever baked, and she didn't know who it was for. She knew who it was for. She wrapped it and put it in the case and told herself it was for whoever wanted it and did not think about amber eyes. She made us a tart, Tarn would say, at 7:15 when Gideon walked through the door, and she put a perfect slice in front of him without being asked. She made us a tart in the middle of the night because she couldn't sleep because she was thinking about us. She is nesting through pastry, and she doesn't even know it. This is the most romantic thing that has ever happened. Gideon ate the tart, his eyes closed. He didn't make the sound this time. He was too far gone for sounds. Chapter 4. The Truth and the Question. It happened on a Tuesday. She was closing up. Gideon was still there. He'd started staying until close, helping her stack chairs, carrying flour bags from the storeroom with one hand, in a way that she'd stopped commenting on, because the list of things she'd stopped commenting on was now 3 pages long. They were alone. The cafe was quiet. The evening light came through the front windows and laid gold rectangles on the floor, and she was wiping down the counter, and he was leaning against the doorframe watching her, and the distance between them was 10 feet and shrinking in a way that had nothing to do with either of them moving. The crash came from outside, something hitting the dumpster, something large. Gideon's head snapped toward the door. His body changed, the looseness, the human ease, gone in a breath. He was across the cafe and at the door in 3 steps, covering distance at a speed that was not possible for a man his size, moving with a precision and a silence that did not belong to a person. "Stay inside," he said, in a voice she didn't recognize. Low, resonant, not a request. "Gideon." He went outside. She followed because she was Hattie Pemberton, and she had never in her life stayed inside when told to stay inside. In the alley behind the cafe, a black bear was rummaging in the dumpster, large, irritable. The kind of bear that showed up in rural towns when garbage management wasn't sufficient and huckleberry season was late. A nuisance bear. Hattie had seen them before. She wasn't afraid of it. She knew how to handle a black bear, make noise, look big, back away slow. But Gideon didn't know she knew that. Gideon heard her footsteps behind him in the alley, her footsteps in a space with a bear, and something in him that was older and less negotiable than reason decided that she was not going to be in this alley for 1 second longer than necessary. "She's behind us," Tarn said, and the wolf's voice was not smug, not earnest, not the patient nag. It was flat and absolute, between us and the threat. Fix it. Gideon was between her and the bear before he'd decided to move, and he was doing something she couldn't process. He was standing very still, too still, and a sound was coming out of him. Not words, a growl. Low, sustained, rising from somewhere in his chest that she was suddenly very sure was deeper than a human chest should go. The sound filled the alley. The bear stopped rummaging, looked at Gideon, and left. Not ran, not fled. Walked away with the unhurried deference of an animal that had just met something higher on the food chain and was choosing peace. Gideon turned around. His eyes were gold, not amber with gold underneath. Full, bright, wolf gold. And his face was changing, the bones underneath doing something impossible, the jaw widening, the brow shifting, as if something inside him was pressing against the human shape, and the human shape was holding, but only just. It wasn't the bear that had done this. The bear was a nuisance. It was her, behind him, unprotected, human, that had blown every circuit his control had. He saw her. The gold stuttered. He shut it down. She watched him do it, watched the effort of it, watched him choose to be a man and mean it. And his eyes were amber again, and his face was his face, and he was breathing like he'd run a mile. She looked at him. He looked at her. That, she said, was not paleo. He laughed. It was a broken laugh, the kind that escapes when the alternative is worse. He pressed his back against the alley wall and slid down until he was sitting on the ground. And he put his face in his hands and laughed, because the woman he loved, and he did love her. Tarn had been saying it for weeks, but he was saying it now, himself, in his own voice in his own head, had just watched him nearly shift in an alley over a garbage bear, and her response was a diet joke. "I need to tell you something," he said from behind his hands. "You're a werewolf." He looked up. "Excuse me?" "You're a werewolf, or a wolf man, or whatever the correct term is." She was standing with her arms crossed and her chin up, and the specific expression of a woman who has assembled every piece of evidence over the course of 6 weeks and has arrived at a conclusion she finds objectively insane but empirically unavoidable. The eyes, the reflexes, the body temperature, the 30 people who turned in unison, the man I watched turn into a wolf at your property, the bear just now. She ticked them off on her fingers. I've been operating under the yeast fume theory, but the yeast fume theory no longer accounts for the data. Gideon stared at her from the alley floor. She figured it out, Tarn said, with a wonder that bordered on religious. She figured it out herself. She is magnificent. You're not surprised? Gideon said. I've been building a spreadsheet. I have columns. She paused. I'm still mostly convinced this is a very elaborate shared delusion. But if it is, it's a delusion with extraordinary production values. He told her. All of it. Standing in the alley behind her cafe at dusk, smelling like garbage bear and adrenaline, he told her about the wolves, the pack, the Alpha King, the hidden world. She listened. She asked questions. Specific, clinical, ordered questions. How the shifting worked, what happened to mass during transformation, whether the dietary requirements were caloric or protein-specific, and at what age the shift first manifested. She asked these questions with a notepad she'd pulled from her apron pocket, and she wrote down the answers. And Gideon answered every one, because he was watching a woman encounter the impossible and respond by taking notes, and he had never loved anyone more. Then she asked the question he'd been dreading. The bond, she said. The mate thing. That's why you come to the cafe? That's why my wolf recognized you. It's not why I come to the cafe. What's the difference? Tarn, the wolf, knew the first day. I've spent 6 weeks learning it. Learning what? That you fight with your espresso machine. That you bake things at 4 a.m. when you can't sleep. That you arrange the pastry case by color because you think it sells better, and you're right. That you tip the busker outside the hardware store even when he's terrible. That your sourdough is the best thing I've ever eaten, and I include in that assessment everything I've eaten in 31 years of life. She was quiet. The bond, she said again, and her voice was different now, stripped. The precision gone, the clinical distance gone. When I started baking things I've never made, when I rearranged my whole schedule so I'd be here when you walked in, when I... She stopped. swallowed. Was that me? Or was that the bond? It was you. How do you know? Because the bond doesn't make you bake. It doesn't give you recipes at 4 in the morning. It doesn't write on cups. The bond is a pull, a warmth, a compass that points. It doesn't move your feet. It doesn't put words on paper cups. It doesn't teach you cardamom pear tart at 4 in the morning. It takes what's already in you and turns the volume up, but the song is yours. You don't know that. You can't know that. You're the wolf in this equation. You know how your side works. You don't know how the human side works because there's never been a human side. He couldn't argue with that. She was right. He didn't know, not for certain, not the way she needed to know, not with data and evidence and the kind of proof that survived cross-examination. He believed it, believed that the cardamom pear tart and the notes on the cups and the way she dropped muffins when she looked at him too long were Hattie, not the bond. But belief wasn't proof, and she was a woman who ran on proof. I need to go, she said. Hattie, I need to go home and sit with this and figure out if anything I felt in the last 6 weeks was mine. She went. He let her go. Follow, Tarn said. No, she's scared. She's not scared, she's thinking. Let her think. But, Tarn, she asked the hardest question either of us has ever been asked, and she deserves time to find her answer. Let her think. Tarn went quiet. Not silent, never fully silent, but quiet. The steady hum dimming to a murmur, like a fire banked to coals. Gideon sat in the alley behind her cafe and did not move for a long time. She didn't open the cafe the next day. The closed sign stayed up. The lights stayed off. Hattie sat in her apartment above the bakery and did something she had not done since moving to this town. Nothing. She didn't bake, she didn't clean, she didn't make lists or spreadsheets or rationalizations. She sat on the kitchen floor. It was becoming a habit, the floor, as if certainty required being closer to the ground, and tried to sort what was hers from what was the bond's. The warmth she felt when he walked through the door, his or hers. The cardamom pear tart at 4 in the morning, his or hers. The way his scent, pine and wood smoke and something animal, something that made her chest ache in a way that wasn't pain, followed her home and sat in her lungs for hours after he left. His or hers? She didn't know. That was the horror. She was a woman who knew things, who measured and categorized and filed, and she could not tell the difference between falling in love and being pulled by a force she hadn't consented to. On the second day, she opened. Routine was a rope. She held on. Gideon didn't come. His absence was a physical thing. The corner table was empty and the cafe felt wrong, lopsided, like a picture hung crooked. She caught herself looking at the door 17 times. She counted. She rearranged the pastry case 3 times. She made his coffee, black, no sugar, before remembering he wasn't there. And then she stood, holding the mug she'd poured for no one, and felt something in her chest that she diagnosed, efficiently and incorrectly, as acid reflux. At 4 in the afternoon, she caught herself smelling his corner of the cafe, his chair, where his hands had rested on the table. She was on her hands and knees sniffing furniture before she realized what she was doing. And then she sat back on her heels and said, aloud to the empty cafe, "This is not rational behavior." It was not rational behavior. She cleaned the table twice and did not smell it again. This is withdrawal, she thought, chemical, dopamine regulation after a period of consistent stimulus. Completely normal, completely explicable. At the Greaves property, Gideon was not doing well. He had attended to pack business. He had signed documents. He had resolved a boundary dispute between the Harker and Drennan territories with the surgical efficiency of a man who was very good at his job and had absolutely nothing else to give the day. Boyd watched him the way one watches a pressure cooker, from a distance, with concern. You could call her, Boyd said. She asked for space. She asked for space. She didn't ask for silence, Tarn said. She asked to think. You could give her something to think about. Gideon looked at his hands. The hands she'd stared at in the cafe when she thought he wasn't looking. The hands that had held a coffee mug she'd poured for him every morning for 6 weeks. The hands that had never, not once, touched her the way they wanted to, had hovered, had been so close the air hummed. Because he was afraid that his touch would feel like the bond, and not like a man. At 2 a.m, he went to the kitchen. He was going to make her bread. On the third morning, she opened the cafe at 5:30 and found something on the doorstep. It was bread, or it had been bread at some point, before something had gone catastrophically wrong during every stage of its production. It was dense, misshapen, and the color of a mistake. It had the structural integrity of a paving stone and the aroma of burnt ambition. Tucked underneath it was a note, handwritten, in the same cramped handwriting she'd never seen before. I tried. It's terrible. I've never baked anything in my life, and it shows. But I made it without the wolf. Tarn wanted to help. I told him bread doesn't require a compass. He disagreed. You said you needed to know if what you felt was yours. I don't know the answer. I only know what's mine. Every morning I walked through your door, I chose to. Not the bond, me. I know this because I'm sitting in a kitchen at 2 a.m, covered in flour, and failing at the thing you do best, and the wolf has nothing to do with it. I just wanted to make you something. It's a terrible something, but it's mine. She held the bread. It weighed roughly what a regulation bowling ball weighs. She pressed her thumb into the crust, and it didn't give. She brought it inside and set it on the counter and looked at it for a long time. Then she cut a piece. She ate it. It was the worst bread she had ever tasted. It had the texture of regret and the flavor profile of a man who had confused baking soda with baking powder and then, apparently, added both. It was, objectively, a war crime against wheat. She ate the whole piece. She cried while she did because he'd made it at 2 a.m, with flour on his hands and no recipe and no wolf, and he'd brought it to her door like an offering, like a man laying down the only weapon he had. And the weapon was terrible bread, and the surrender was absolute. She wrapped the rest and put it in her freezer. She would keep it. She didn't need to explain why. Chapter 5. The Silence and the Choice. He gave her 4 days. On the 5th day, he woke up and asked his wolf to be quiet. What? I need you to be quiet today. Not gone, just quiet. No commentary, no pull, no compass. I need to be just the man. Tarn processed this. You want me to stop feeling her? I want to know what I feel without you. I need to know if what's in my chest is mine or yours. She asked, and I didn't have the answer. And I'm not going to her without one. She's ours. She might be yours. I need to find out if she's mine. A long pause, the longest Tarn had ever been quiet. Not from confusion, not from oblivion, but from something that looked, from inside, like respect. One day, Tarn said, I will be very quiet. But she is ours. You'll see. Tarn settled. Not gone. Hattie had been right about that. You couldn't separate the wolf from the man. They were one thing. But banked. Dimmed. Gideon could still feel him in there, a warmth behind his ribs, a weight that was always present, the way you feel your own heartbeat if you hold still long enough. Tarn wasn't sleeping. Tarn wasn't suppressed. He was just choosing, for the first time in his existence, to be quiet. The compass that had been pointing at a bakery in a small town since the first day she'd had flour on her face powered down to a whisper, and then less than a whisper, and then as close to nothing as a wolf could voluntarily go while still being awake inside the same body. Gideon drove to town. Without the pull, the drive was different, quieter. He noticed things he hadn't noticed in weeks. The mountain visible from the highway, the color of the sky, the way the road curved near the river. He'd been so full of her that the world had narrowed to a corridor between the property and a cafe door. Now it was wide again, and wide was lonely, and the loneliness was the answer to one of the questions. He missed her. Not the Bond's version of missing, not the ache, not the pull, not the biological imperative. He missed the way she talked to her oven. He missed the flower she could never quite get off her left eyebrow. He missed the way she argued with facts the way other people argued with opinions, with passion and structure and an absolute refusal to lose. He missed the terrible coffee her espresso machine produced when it was in one of its moods. He missed the way she'd started putting extra pastry on his plate and pretending she hadn't. He missed being chosen every day by a woman who didn't have to choose him. He parked. He sat in the truck for a moment, the way he'd sat in the truck 6 weeks ago, except everything was different, and he was the one who was different. 6 weeks ago, he'd been an alpha king whose wolf had just found his mate. Today, he was a man with flour still under his fingernails from a bread that should not exist, walking into a bakery because it was the only place in the world he wanted to be, and the wanting was entirely, provably, his. He walked into the cafe. She was behind the counter, flour on her apron, hair coming out of its braid the way it always did by afternoon. She looked up when the door opened, and the expression on her face went through 3 things in fast sequence: surprise, relief, and a careful blankness she pulled over both like a sheet over furniture. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She studied him. He could feel her doing it, that clinical gaze, the one that measured and categorized and filed. She was looking for something. "You're different today," she said. "How?" "Less present. Like there's less of you in the room." He sat at the corner table. She brought him coffee without asking. The exchange was familiar. 6 weeks of muscle memory, the mug set down, the fingers not quite touching. But today it was just coffee. Just a mug. Just a woman's hand and a man's hand, and the ordinary space between them. No warmth, no pull, no compass. He missed the pull. The pull had been telling him the truth. But missing it was different from needing it, and the difference was the thing he'd come here to find. She sat across from him. She'd never done that, never sat at his table, never put herself on his side of the counter. Today she did. She sat with her hands wrapped around her own mug and looked at him with an expression that was not clinical and was not careful and was not performing practicality. "You asked the wolf to be quiet," she said. "How did you know?" "Because you usually look at me like I'm the only thing in the room. Today you're looking at me like I'm the most important thing in the room. It's different." He stared at her. She'd parsed the difference between the Bond's pull and his choice by observing his eye contact. She had taken the mystery apart. She had done the most Hattie thing possible. She had looked at the supernatural and measured it. "She is the most terrifying woman alive," is what Tarn would have said if Tarn were not being very, very quiet. "I needed to know," Gideon said. "You asked if what I felt was me or the wolf. I didn't have the answer, so I asked him to step back." And he looked at her. No gold in his eyes, no supernatural pull, no biological destiny, no goddess's hand, no compass, no ancient certainty. Just a man in a cafe looking at a woman he'd spent 6 weeks choosing. Every day. Not because a Bond told him to, because she fought with her espresso machine, because she baked at 4 a.m, because she'd watched a man turn into a wolf and responded by taking notes. "It's me," he said. "All of it. The wolf knew first, but it's me." She was quiet for a long time. The cafe was empty. She'd closed early, he realized. She'd closed early, and she was sitting at his table, and her hands were wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from, and the late afternoon light was catching the flower on her eyebrow, the one she never quite got clean. "I closed early," she said. "I noticed." I closed early because I saw your truck from the window and I wanted to sit across from you. She looked at the mug in her hands. I didn't know the wolf was quiet. I didn't know anything was different. I just wanted to be here. She looked up. That was mine. Whatever the bond does, that was mine. I can prove it because I didn't have any new information. I just had the same pull I've had for 6 weeks, and I walked around the counter. She stood up. She walked around the table. He watched her come the way he'd watched her the first day, with everything in him, all of it, every part of the single thing he was. Except today, the everything was just his. She put her hands on his face, flour on her fingers. There was always flour on her fingers. She didn't say anything. She held his face and looked at him, and he could feel her deciding. Not the bond deciding, not the pull deciding. Her, Hattie. The woman who took the mystery out of everything, standing in front of a man who had removed his own mystery so she could see what was underneath. He put his forehead against hers. His eyes were amber, human amber, no gold, just him. Tell the wolf he can come back, she said. He'll be insufferable. I know. Tarn surged back like a tide coming in. Hours. Hours. I was very patient. I would like credit for my patience. I was extremely quiet, and it was very difficult, and she is ours, and I was right the whole time, and... Gideon kissed her. He kissed her, and his wolf finally, blessedly, shut up. Not because the wolf was gone, because the wolf and the man were the same thing, and the same thing was kissing a woman with flour on her fingers who had chosen him twice, once without knowing what he was, and once knowing everything. She kissed him back, her hands still on his face, the flour from her fingers on his jaw. She tasted like coffee and cardamom, and the specific, uncategorizable warmth that he'd been trying to find his whole life, without knowing it was a woman in a small town who fought with appliances and refused to believe in anything she couldn't see. When they separated, she said, "Your eyes are gold." I know. Full gold, not the subtle amber thing. Full, unmistakable, biologically impossible gold. I'm aware. She considered this. I'm going to need a bigger spreadsheet. I'll buy you one. And your sister still owes me for breaking my hand with that handshake. She'll apologize. And Boyd needs to stop telling people things run in the family. Nobody believes him. Nobody has ever believed him. She smiled. He smiled back, the real one, the one she'd been pulling out of him for 6 weeks, one free pastry at a time. 3 months later, the corner table by the window, the one with the draft, the one nobody used to choose, had a small card on it that read, "Reserved." Hattie Pemberton still ran her cafe. She still fought with the espresso machine. She still baked things at 4 in the morning, though now she had a name for why she couldn't sleep on the nights he wasn't there, and the name was not stress, and was not caffeine sensitivity, and was a word she still refused to say out loud, because saying it would mean accepting a framework she had not yet fully verified. She kept a notebook in her apron pocket. On the front she'd written, "Things I can't explain." The list was long. She added to it every week. In the back of the notebook, a second list, shorter. Things I don't need to explain. It had one entry. His name. She'd asked about the marking. He'd tried to explain. She'd asked 14 follow-up questions. Boyd had been called in. Tilda had offered to demonstrate. This was declined. At the end of it, Hattie had said, "I'll need to review the literature," which Boyd later confirmed meant she's going to say yes, but she needs to feel like she arrived at it through data. She still called the pack "your dog friends" sometimes, on purpose, just to watch Boyd's face. She still put extra pastry on Gideon's plate. She still wouldn't call it what it was. Nesting, Tarn said, every single morning, watching her arrange his plate. She's nesting. Tell her she's nesting. No, she's nesting through pastry, Gideon. This is historically significant. This has never happened before in the entire history of Tarn. I'm just saying. Gideon ate his pastry. He did not correct her. He did not tell her. He sat at his corner table in a cafe that smelled like warm bread and butter and her. And he let her be exactly as practical and exactly as skeptical and exactly as certain as she needed to be, because that was the woman his wolf had recognized and his human heart had chosen. And both of those things were the same thing, and both of those things were his. She came by with the coffee pot. Refill. Routine. Your eyes are doing the thing, she said. I know. It's been 3 months. You'd think you'd have that under control. You'd think. She looked at him. He looked at her. The gold in his eyes was steady, warm, unapologetic. She topped off his coffee. I'm adding it to the spreadsheet, she said. I'd expect nothing less. She went back behind the counter. He watched her go. She was humming. She only hummed when she was happy, and she only hummed when she thought he couldn't hear. And she'd apparently forgotten that he could hear a pin drop in the next county. She's humming, Tarn observed. I hear it. She hums when she's happy. I know, we did that. We made her hum. Gideon said nothing. He drank his coffee. He read his newspaper. He let the hum fill the room and didn't need a single thing explained.